What happens when love doesn't save the king, but rewrites the laws of the moon itself? Welcome, Untamed Hearts. You've returned to Tales by Jenny Moon, a place where the wild waits, where every heartbeat can be hunted, and every touch carries danger. Tonight's story will stir your senses, tempt you with desire, and bind you to alphas, fated mates, and the hunger that never lets go. But remember, every choice has its cost. Mark your presence with the pack, like, comment, subscribe, share, so the night knows you're here and the stories know where to find you. Stay close, Untamed Heart. The night has already chosen you.
Snow fell in slow, deliberate sheets, veiling the mountainside in pale silence. The caravan crawled across the narrow pass like an insect tracing the spine of the world. Wagons creaked under the weight of grain and steel, wheels cracking the frozen crust of ice. Horses huffed, their breath silver in the biting air. Men spoke little on this journey. The frozen north was not a place for idle words. Every sound carried here, the crack of a whip, the muttered curse of a driver, the weary cough of a soldier guarding the rear. But beneath the rhythm of hooves and wheels, something else lingered. A silence too complete. A stillness that pressed against the skin. Lyra felt it before the others. She had always been too quick to notice what others dismissed. Even wrapped in her threadbare cloak, hood shadowing her face, she could not shake the wrongness in the air. The forest that lined the mountain pass was thick, ancient, its trees like black spires thrusting into the sky. No owls called, no branches shifted, not even the whisper of wind. She lifted her eyes from the snow and knew. Danger was waiting. Her heart quickened, but she said nothing. Omegas never spoke in the presence of warriors. Servants like her kept their heads down, their words tucked behind clenched teeth. Even if she warned them, no alpha would heed her. The first howl broke the world apart. It cut through the silence with a raw, jagged edge, long, guttural, and close. Horses reared, screaming, hooves skidding on ice. Torches wavered in trembling hands. The guards, alphas trained for war, tightened their grips on steel, forming a half circle around the wagons. Another howl answered, then another, until the mountains themselves seemed to echo with feral hunger. Shadows moved between the trees. The rogues had come. They descended without warning, black shapes lunging from the tree line with snapping jaws and clawed hands. Men shouted, blades slashed. The first guard went down under a blur of muscle and teeth. Blood sprayed, hot and startling against the snow. Lyra froze. Her body screamed at her to move, but her legs locked. She had seen death before. Quiet, pitiful deaths in Omega quarters. But this was different. This was chaos, brutal and immediate, tearing through the ordered line of men like fire through dry grass. A rogue slammed into the wagon beside her. The wood shattered with a crack, spilling grain across the snow. Lyra stumbled back, clutching her cloak tight, but the beast's eyes caught hers, red, unblinking, a predator scenting prey. It snarled, lips peeling away from yellowed fangs. It leapt. Steel intercepted, plunging into the rogue's side. A guard staggered forward, dragging the blade free. The rogue collapsed, writhing before stilling in the snow. Lyra's relief was short-lived. The guard fell too, a deep slash across his chest leaking blood in thick rivulets. He dropped to his knees, gasping like a drowning man. Lyra's instincts betrayed her silence. She rushed forward, dropping beside him. "Hold on," she whispered, pressing her hands against his wound. The heat of his blood burned through her palms, the smell metallic and sharp in her throat. The man's eyes glazed. His breaths came shallow, rapid. She pressed harder, desperation clawing at her chest. "Don't die," she begged under her breath. "Not like this. Please." Then the impossible happened. A warmth unfurled from her hands, soft, pulsing, alive. Silver light seeped between her fingers, spilling into his torn flesh. The guard's body jerked, his eyes widening in horror as the wound closed under her touch. Skin knitted, blood vanished, muscle restored as though rewound in time. The light dimmed. Silence pressed close again, heavy and suffocating. The guard stared at her, not with gratitude, but fear. He pushed away from her as though she had burned him, crawling back on trembling arms. "Witch," he rasped. Lyra's breath caught. "Witch." The word echoed louder than the howls, but she had no time to defend herself, no time to deny. Hands seized her from behind, rough and merciless. She cried out, kicking, clawing, but claws dug into her arms, dragging her off her knees. The rogues had seen. They had seen the light. Her hood slipped back as she was pulled toward the tree line. Snow burned against her skin as she fought, her nails raking her captor's face. It didn't flinch. The rogue's breath was foul, hot against her ear. "Found you," it growled. Lyra thrashed, her heart hammering like a trapped bird. She had no idea why they wanted her, why they hadn't simply killed her as they did the others. But she knew one thing. She would not go quietly. Another rogue joined, lifting her by the arms as if she weighed nothing. The world spun. Torches, screams, steel, the smell of iron and frost. She caught one last glimpse of the battlefield. Guards falling, wagons burning, snow stained black with blood, and then darkness. The blow to her head sent her spiraling into nothingness. The last thing she remembered was the look in the guard's eyes as her light healed him. Not awe, not gratitude, but terror. Terror of her. Darkness gave way to firelight. Lyra stirred against the weight of silks and furs, a stark contrast to the frozen soil she had last felt beneath her cheek. Her body was sore, heavy, and her mind clawed at fragments of memory. The blood, the claws, the silver light that had betrayed her. When her eyes opened, she saw stone. Smooth black walls stretched high above her, etched with ancient carvings that seemed to shift in the flickering light. A fire roared in a hearth the size of a wagon, throwing shadows across the chamber. The bed she lay upon was carved of oak, draped in furs from beasts she did not recognize. This was no dungeon. And yet, the chains told another story. Silver cuffs bound her wrists, the metal cool and humming faintly with energy. They were not tight, but they carried a weight far beyond steel. Her skin prickled where they touched, as though the cuffs themselves disapproved of her existence. She sat up slowly, her breath catching as the heavy door creaked open. The guards entered first, towering men with the bearing of alphas, their armor gleaming black. Their presence was commanding, but it was the man who followed that froze Lyra's blood. The king. He was not draped in a crown or jewels. Power didn't cling to him because of a throne. It emanated from him, woven into every movement. His broad frame filled the chamber, his cloak of wolf pelt brushing the stone floor as he walked. His hair, dark as midnight, fell to his shoulders, and his eyes, those eyes, glowed with a restrained fire, gold rimmed in the faintest silver. The air seemed to bow around him. Lyra's heart thundered. She had heard whispers of the Alpha King in hushed corners, tales traded in the dark, merciless in war, unyielding in judgment, a man feared as much as he was obeyed. But nothing in those stories had prepared her for the reality of his presence. He stopped at the foot of her bed, his gaze sweeping over her like a blade weighing the worth of its target. "So?" His voice was deep, measured, each word heavy as stone. "You are the one the rogues tried to take." Lyra's throat tightened. She swallowed hard, but her voice came raw. I don't know why." The king's gaze sharpened. "Do not lie to me." Her chains rattled as she clenched her fists. "If I knew, do you think I would have been out there, dragged like a lamb to slaughter?" A dangerous silence followed. The guards shifted uneasily, but the king's eyes never left hers. And then, faint, almost too faint, he smiled. Not with warmth, with recognition. "You are no ordinary servant," he said. "I saw it. Your hands. Lyra's stomach dropped. The memory of silver light seared through her mind. She tried to deny it, but the words stuck in her throat. The king stepped closer, his shadow spilling over her. Moonbound. The whisper wasn't his. It came from the guards, low, reverent, fearful. Lyra's breath caught. She had heard the word once before, in stories told by Omegas huddled by dying fires. Moonbound, cursed by the goddess, fated to bring either salvation or ruin to the alphas they touched. But it was always myth, always a tale to frighten children into obedience. Moonbound, the king repeated, as if testing the word on his tongue. His voice carried no fear, only interest. Gift or curse, I will decide. He turned, gesturing to the guards. She stays in the east wing, under watch. Feed her, clothe her, chain her. She is not to leave. The order rang final, unquestionable. And then he left, cloak sweeping, his presence vanishing into the corridor as though a storm had passed through. Lyra sat trembling in the firelight, her chains heavier than iron now. She was not in a dungeon, but she was no guest. A prisoner, dressed in silks. A treasure, or a weapon. She didn't yet know which. Days blurred, marked only by the routines of guards who brought her food and the silence of stone walls. She explored little of her chamber, for the chains clung to her wrists like a reminder. No matter how fine the surroundings, she was trapped. And yet, she felt him. The king. She would catch glimpses of him across the great hall when her guards escorted her to eat. He never sat among his lords, never shared in their wine. He stood always watching her. His gaze was not lecherous, not cruel. It was something colder, calculating. As if she were a puzzle he had not yet solved. Whispers followed her everywhere. Court women pressed their lips together when she passed, men muttered under breath. Moonbound. Some spoke it with awe, others with venom, but always with fear. Lyra resolved one thing. She would not rot here waiting for the king to decide what she was. On the third night, when the moon spilled white across the chamber floor, she knelt at her window, studying the iron bars that caged the view. The guards were posted outside the door, 2 of them, always 2. She had no weapon, no allies, and the cuffs hummed with whatever strange magic kept her wolf buried silent inside. But she had survived this long by not relying on what others gave her. Escape was the only choice. She pressed her forehead against the bars, closing her eyes, whispering to herself the words her mother once said. Even an Omega learns to bite when the world won't let her run. When she opened her eyes again, her resolve was steel. She would not wait for fate, she would carve her own. And yet, every time she tried to imagine slipping past those guards, her thoughts betrayed her. They returned, unbidden, to the king's eyes, gold rimmed with silver, unyielding, watching, always watching. What unsettled her most was not his power, not the chains, not even the whispers. It was the quiet suspicion growing inside her, that he was not afraid of her at all. The days passed like smoke curling from a fire, slow, restless, suffocating. Lyra was no longer caged in darkness. She walked the polished halls of the palace, always under the eye of 2 guards who shadowed her like hounds. They allowed her no true freedom, yet she could not deny the strange contrast of her life now. Silks where once she wore rags, roasted meats instead of stale crusts. She lived among the glitter of power, but the chains at her wrists hummed faintly whenever she touched them, a constant reminder she was never free. Tonight, however, there was no solitude. The great hall had been lit in honor of returning generals. A feast stretched across the room, tables heavy with spiced venison, golden bread, and goblets of deep red wine. Hundreds filled the chamber, lords and ladies in embroidered finery, warriors in polished armor, servants darting like shadows with trays of food. At the head of the hall, raised on a dais of black stone, sat the throne carved from a single block of obsidian, and on it the king. He wore no crown. He didn't need one. His presence alone anchored the hall, every alpha and nobleman bending unconsciously around the weight of his existence, He did not smile, did not partake of food or drink. He simply watched, golden eyes burning, calculating, steady. And Lyra knew, as she sat among the courtiers on the far end, that he was watching her. The silks they had given her clung strangely to her form, alien against her skin. She sat rigid, picking at her plate, ignoring the stares. Whispers followed her like gnats, moonbound, cursed, dangerous. She kept her head down, forcing her breath to steady, but she could feel the tension in the air, as if the entire court waited for her to stumble. It did not take long for someone to draw blood. A young noble leaned across the table, his hair bound in golden clasps, his lips curling with amusement. His voice was pitched just loudly enough to carry down the line. "Tell me, little Omega," he drawled, "how does it feel to sit among wolves who could snap your neck with a thought? Do your chains comfort you, or are you hoping to charm your way out of them?" The table chuckled. Others joined. Snide remarks, false smiles. Lyra clenched her jaw, refusing to answer. Another voice, sharper, female. "Perhaps the king keeps her because she glows in the dark. A useful trick for finding one's way to bed." Laughter rippled, sharper this time. Lyra's face burned. Her fingers dug into her lap, nails biting through silk. She had grown up among insults, mockery, the constant reminder that Omegas were lesser. But here, under the weight of hundreds of eyes, the humiliation cut deeper. She lifted her chin, her voice, though quiet, carried clear. "Strange, isn't it, that for all your power you fear what you don't understand?" The laughter faltered. The noble's face darkened. He rose halfway, ready to strike her across the table, when the hall froze. A chair scraped against stone. The king had stood. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the torches seemed to hesitate, their flames bending as if bowing. Slowly he descended the dais. Every step echoed like a drumbeat. The noble who had mocked her stiffened, sweat breaking at his brow. The king reached him without hurry, without expression, and placed a single hand on the man's shoulder. "You find humor," the king said softly, "in mocking what belongs to me?" The noble stammered, My king, I meant no." The king's hand tightened. A crack split the air. The noble gasped, knees buckling, his shoulder crushed beneath the pressure. The scream that followed rang through the hall. "Sit," the king ordered, his voice low, dangerous. The man collapsed into his chair, clutching his arm, trembling. No one else spoke. No one even breathed. The king turned, his gaze sweeping the hall. "Mock her again," he said, "and you mock me." The words hung heavy, final. He returned to his throne, settling without flourish, as though the moment had cost him nothing. But Lyra felt the shift. The hall would never see her as harmless again. She was no longer an outcast, a curiosity. They would see her as dangerous, because the king had claimed her with a single declaration. Her heart hammered. She hated the heat rising in her chest, hated that a part of her had felt a sliver of safety in his protection. She reminded herself, she was still chained, still a prisoner. The feast resumed, quieter now, the laughter gone. Lyra kept her head down, but her mind would not still. She replayed the words, the look in his eyes when he had silenced them. It was not kindness, it was ownership. Later, when the hall had thinned and the torches burned low, she was led back toward her chamber. The guard's boots echoed against the stone, steady as a heartbeat. Lyra walked silently, but fragments of the night clung to her. It was then, as they passed the armory, that she caught voices through the crack of a half-open door. "Okay, orders were not to kill her," one soldier whispered. Her steps faltered. She tilted her head, straining. "Not to kill?" another scoffed. "Then why did the rogues slaughter the caravan?" A pause. Then, the first voice lowered, grim. "Because the command was clear. The girl must be taken alive. Someone powerful wants her. Someone who pays rogues well enough to bleed for her." Her stomach turned to ice. Alive, not dead, not an accident. She had been hunted, dragged into this palace not by chance but by design. Someone, somewhere, wanted her caged, and the rogues had been their hounds. The guards at her side tugged her forward, oblivious. Lyra dropped her gaze, hiding the storm brewing in her eyes. When they reached her chamber, the door closed behind her with a heavy thud. She pressed her back to the wood, her breath shallow. The king watched her. Yes. The court whispered. Yes. But now she knew the truth. The rogues had not failed. They had only been interrupted, and whoever had given the order was still waiting. Somewhere beyond these walls, a hand had already reached for her. The night pressed heavy against the palace walls, the air thick with silence. Lyra lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling where moonlight spilled across carved beams. Sleep would not come. Her mind replayed the whispers she had overheard. The rogues had been ordered to take her alive. Not kill, not maim, alive. The thought coiled around her chest like a serpent. "Why me?" she asked the dark. But no answer came, only the hollow echo of her own fear. Eventually, exhaustion dragged her under, and that was when she dreamed. The world opened around her in silver light, the kind that poured not from sun or moon but from something eternal. She stood barefoot in a forest of glass trees, their branches chiming softly when the wind moved through them. Shadows shifted at the edges, wolves of mist darting between trunks, their eyes glowing faintly blue. Then, from the heart of the woods came it, a wolf, vast and radiant, its fur woven from liquid moonlight. Silver dripped from its paws with every step, its eyes, piercing, timeless, locked onto hers, and she felt herself small, unworthy, fragile before its majesty. Lyra's knees buckled, but she could not look away. The wolf spoke without words. A voice inside her skull, deep and resonant, not male nor female, but something beyond. Child of shadow and flame. Moonbound. The word throbbed like a heartbeat inside her chest. "You know me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I have always known you. What am I?" The wolf stepped closer, breath washing over her like cold wind. Its muzzle lowered until its nose almost brushed her forehead. "You are not chosen for love, but for judgment." Her heart clenched. The silver wolf's gaze burned through her, revealing layers of truth she had never dared imagine. Moonbound do not exist to warm thrones or cradle kings. You are the blade, not the bond. When a ruler falls to corruption, it is the moonbound who delivers the final strike. Her breath caught. An executioner? The wolf's ears flicked, its voice a whisper of leaves. "You are destiny's shadow, Lyra, and the shadow falls longest upon the brightest flame." Before she could speak again, the dream cracked like glass. The forest shattered. The wolf vanished. She woke with a cry, sitting upright in her bed, drenched in cold sweat. The moonlight through her window seemed harsher now, accusing as though it too knew what she carried. But Lyra was not the only one to dream that night. In the chamber beneath the throne room, where few dared tread, the king stood among shelves of crumbling scrolls and ancient relics. His hand traced the brittle parchment, his golden eyes flicking over the words. The palace scholars had been ordered to search the archives. Rumors had spread of her, moonbound. The word itself carried weight. And now, as he read the scroll in silence, the truth sank like a blade into his chest. Beware the moonbound. They are not mates, nor healers, nor bringers of peace. They are the hand of the goddess, forged to cut down kings who lose themselves to bloodlust. When the silver wolf appears, know your reign is judged. The king closed his eyes. His breath came slow, measured, but his fist clenched around the parchment until it nearly tore. Executioner, not gift, not mate, executioner. He could almost hear the whispers of the hall again, the way they had muttered the word with hunger and fear. Moonbound. He had silenced them, claimed her before all. But now he wondered if he had chained a knife to his own throat. For a long time he stood in the dim chamber, the torches casting his shadow against the wall, long and monstrous, and though he did not admit it aloud, suspicion festered. The next morning, Lyra walked the gardens under guard, her mind still tangled in the dream. She touched the petals of a white rose absently, though their softness felt unreal. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the wolf's silver fur, heard its voice declaring her a blade, the blade of the goddess. She wanted to laugh, to scream, to deny it. How could she, an Omega cast aside her entire life, be destined for such a role? Yet deep in her chest, beneath layers of fear, a small flame flickered. What if it's true? Her gaze shifted, drawn by instinct. Across the courtyard, the king watched her from a balcony. He leaned on the rail, one hand gripping it lightly, golden eyes steady, unreadable. He had not announced himself, yet she felt the weight of his stare as surely as chains. A shiver crawled down her spine. He knew something. She could see it in his gaze. Sharper now, colder. Their eyes locked. For a heartbeat, neither looked away. It was not the gaze of captor and prisoner, nor of protector and ward. It was the gaze of predator and threat, of two beings circling each other, both uncertain which would strike first. Then he turned, vanishing into shadow, leaving her breathless. That night, Lyra's chamber was lit only by a single candle. She could not sleep. The dream clung to her, the words etched into her mind. She curled against the wall, whispering to herself. "I am not your executioner," she said to the darkness. "I am no one's blade." But the silence did not answer. And outside her door, in the hall where no torch burned, the king stood unseen, listening. His expression was unreadable, his thoughts a storm he would never speak. The palace walls loomed higher with every passing day. Lyra had walked its gilded halls, eaten at its feasts, slept in its chambers. But it was still a prison. And she would not rot in a cage. That night, when the torches burned low and the corridors fell into silence, she made her move. The guards outside her chamber had grown complacent. Perhaps they thought her spirit had been tamed, or perhaps they had been lulled into the belief that no one could escape these walls. Either way, they had underestimated her. Lyra had spent nights memorizing the rhythms of their patrols, the squeak of boots on stone, the pauses when they exchanged idle words. When the moment came, she slipped from her bed, pressing her ear to the door until she heard their footsteps recede. The window was her only hope. Though narrow, it overlooked the gardens below. She gritted her teeth, bracing her shoulders, and squeezed through, the stone scraping her skin. The night air rushed cold against her face as she dangled for a heartbeat, then dropped, landing hard on the damp earth. Pain shot up her ankle, but she bit it back. She could not falter now. The garden stretched ahead, vast and silvered by moonlight. Roses spilled across trellises, fountains trickled softly, and beyond the hedge walls loomed the outer ramparts. Freedom lay past those walls. She ran. Her bare feet tore against gravel paths, her breath shallow but determined. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind seemed deafening in her ears. She darted between statues and hedges, her pulse hammering. She could almost see it now, the wall, the gate, the stars beyond. But then, a shadow detached itself from the darkness ahead. He stepped into her path with the inevitability of a storm, golden eyes burning like embers in the night. He wore no armor, no cloak, only a simple black shirt. The sleeves rolled, revealing forearms marked with scars. Yet the weight of him, the sheer power in the stillness of his stance, froze her in place. The king. Lyra skidded to a halt, her breath ragged. "Going somewhere?" His voice was low, cutting through the night air with lethal calm. Her chest rose and fell, her body trembling, but her chin lifted stubbornly. "Better a grave in the forest than chains in your palace." For a moment, neither moved. The fountains whispered, A nightbird sang, but all else held its breath. Then, before she could react, he moved. In one heartbeat, he was yards away. In the next, he was upon her. His hand caught her wrist with unyielding force, spinning her so her back slammed against the cold marble of a garden pillar. She gasped, struggling, but his grip only tightened, the heat of his body pressing close. "Do you think," he growled, "that I would let you run so easily?" Her eyes blazed, though her pulse thundered in her throat. "You don't own me." The king's jaw clenched, his gaze boring into hers. For a long, taut moment, there was no air between them, only the war of wills, the clash of fire against fire. And then he said something that made her breath falter. "If you're meant to kill me," his voice dropped, rough, almost vulnerable, "why do I feel safest when you're near?" The words struck harder than chains. Lyra froze, confusion storming through her. He had read the same scrolls then. He knew what she was. And yet, instead of casting her to the dungeons, instead of ordering her death, he admitted this strange, dangerous truth. Her heart stumbled. She hated the way it responded, the way her body betrayed her with a shiver. "You're a fool," she whispered. "You should fear me." His lips curved, not a smile, but something darker. "I fear many things, but not you." The heat between them thickened, suffocating. Her chest brushed his with every breath. His hand still held her wrist pinned, his other braced against the pillar beside her head. Every inch of her body screamed to flee, yet some traitorous part leaned toward the very danger she should despise. She forced herself to meet his gaze, steady and unyielding. "Let me go." For a moment she thought he might. His hand trembled, just slightly, as if torn between control and surrender. But then he released her wrist only to grip her chin instead, tilting her face up toward him. "You run," he said softly, almost regretfully, "and you make yourself prey. I do not allow prey in my kingdom." Lyra's breath hitched. She could feel the warmth of his skin, smell the faint scent of steel and smoke clinging to him. Her heart betrayed her again, hammering not from fear, but from something she could not name, something she did not want to name. Then, just as suddenly as he had caged her, he stepped back. The night air rushed between them, sharp and cold. "Take her back," he ordered the guards, who had finally caught up, panting. His voice was hard again, his expression unreadable. Lyra stood frozen for a moment, her chest rising and falling, before the guards closed in. They seized her arms, dragging her back toward the palace. She did not resist. Her body still trembled with the aftershock of his nearness. But her mind burned. She had tried to run. He had caught her. And instead of punishment, he had given her something far more dangerous, a question she could not shake. "If you're meant to kill me, why do I feel safest with you near?" Long after she was locked in her chamber once more, that question echoed inside her. And in his own chamber, the king stood alone at the balcony, staring into the silver night, his hand still tingling where it had touched her. Neither slept. Neither would admit why. The palace never slept. Even in the depth of night, torches lined its walls, guards paced its corridors, and whispers fluttered like moths in the dark. But that morning, the atmosphere was heavier than usual, sharp, charged, as if the very stones of the throne hall braced for conflict. Lyra felt it the moment the guards escorted her in. The chamber was already crowded. Lords and warriors in gleaming armor filled the steps below the dais, their voices low, tense. At the far end of the hall, just beyond the threshold, stood the envoys. They were 6 in number, cloaked in black and crimson, their wolf crest stitched in silver across their chests, the rival kingdom of Valor. Even from across the room, Lyra could sense their arrogance, the straightness of their spines, the cold gleam in their eyes. One of them carried a scroll, sealed in wax, while another rested his hand casually on the hilt of a blade. They had come for her. The king sat on his throne, his expression unreadable, golden eyes steady as firelight. He had summoned her here to witness, though he gave no reason. Lyra's pulse quickened as she was led forward, placed at the foot of the dais as if she were the prize at the center of this dispute. The leader of the envoys stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair bound in silver cords that marked him as highborn. His voice rang through the hall like steel striking stone. "We come with the will of our king." The girl, he extended a gloved hand toward Lyra without looking at her, is moonbound. She belongs not to Dragor, but to Valor. By our prophecy, she is fated to walk with our sovereign. To withhold her is to defy divine law. A murmur swept the hall. Lyra's stomach twisted. She had never heard of Valor's prophecy, but the way the envoy spoke left no doubt. They believed it as truth, perhaps as fiercely as Dragor believed their own scrolls. The king leaned back in his throne, his jaw tightening. "Belongs." His voice was quiet, dangerous. "She is no one's property." The envoy smirked faintly. "Spoken like a ruler blind to the will of the goddess. But if you will not yield her, then understand this. Valor does not beg. We demand, and demand is always followed by action." The words dripped with threat. Lyra's breath caught, her heart pounding. "Because of me. This is because of me." The king rose slowly, every movement deliberate. When he stood, the room itself seemed to shrink, the torches flickering as if bowing to his presence. His golden eyes fixed on the envoy with lethal calm. "You cross my threshold," he said. "You spit prophecy in my hall, and you dare to demand what is mine?" The envoy's smirk faltered. "Yours?" A ripple of silence followed. Lyra's cheeks burned at the word, but the king's voice cut like a blade. "Yes," he said. "Mine to guard, mine to judge, mine to keep or cast aside. Not yours, not your king's, and certainly not for Valor to claim like a trinket at market." The envoy's hand twitched at his sword hilt. Gasps spread through the court. But the king did not stop. He descended the dais, each step echoing, until he stood before the envoy. The difference in height was slight, but in presence the envoy shrank. The king's voice dropped to a growl, low enough only those nearest could hear, but sharp enough to pierce the silence. "Return to your realm. Tell your king that Dragor does not yield. Tell him if he wants her, he can march his armies to my gates, and then he will learn what becomes of kings who mistake prophecy for power." With that, he shoved the envoy backward, not with brute force, but with calculated humiliation. The man stumbled, nearly falling before catching himself. His cheeks flushed crimson, his pride bleeding in front of 100 watching eyes. The hall erupted in noise. Some shouted in support, others in fear. The envoys gathered quickly, their leader snarling, but he knew better than to draw steel in another king's throne room. "This is war," he spat before turning sharply and storming from the hall. His men followed, cloaks snapping behind them like torn banners. The doors slammed shut. For a moment, the court buzzed with panic. War. War. The words spread like wildfire. Lords muttered, warriors whispered, and somewhere deep in the chamber, Lyra's hands shook, because she knew the truth. This conflict had not begun with Dragor or Valor. It had begun with her. When the court was dismissed, Lyra found herself alone in the garden once more, the air sharp with the scent of roses. But there was no beauty tonight, only fear curling in her chest. She pressed her hands to the cold stone of the fountain, her breath shallow. "I don't belong to either of them. I don't belong to anyone. But if they fight because of me..." The thought sickened her. She had dreamed of escape, of freedom, never of kingdoms burning in her name. Behind her, a familiar presence filled the air. "You heard them." She turned. The king stood in the shadows, his expression carved in stone. "They will march," he said. "Not tomorrow, not next week, but soon. They will come." Lyra swallowed hard. "Because of me." His eyes narrowed. "Because they are weak men clinging to prophecy. You are only the excuse they needed." Her voice cracked, raw with emotion. Then let them take me. If my life keeps your people from war, enough. His tone snapped through the night like a whip. He stepped closer, eyes blazing. Do you think I would hand you over? Do you think Dragor bends to anyone? Her lips parted, but the fury in his voice silenced her. You speak of sacrifice, he continued, quieter now, his breath rough. But you do not see. If they take you, they will not stop at one life. You are not peace, Lyra. You are the spark, and sparks do not end wars. They ignite them. Her throat tightened. He was right. Even if she gave herself willingly, Valor would use her, twist her, and still march. Her existence was a torch, and both kingdoms had already smelled the smoke. She turned her face away, tears stinging her eyes. Then I am a curse. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. She expected agreement. She expected him to leave her in her shame. Instead, she felt his hand close gently, unexpectedly around her wrist. Not the brutal grip of capture, not the force of chains, but something steady, grounding. His voice was low, almost tender. Or perhaps you are the only truth left in a world built on lies. Lyra looked up, startled, and for the first time, she saw not the king, the warrior, the ruler, the predator, but the man beneath. Weary and fierce, clinging to something he himself could not yet name. And in that moment, against her will, her heart betrayed her once more. The night air was heavy with smoke and memory. The palace was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that hummed after storms. Beyond the tall windows of the king's private hall, the moon hung swollen and watchful, its silver light spilling across the stone floor in broken stripes. Lyra sat at the edge of the chamber, wrists no longer bound, but her spirit far from free. She had stopped planning her escape for tonight. Something else held her still. The way the king stood near the fire, his broad shoulders framed by the flicker of orange and shadow, eyes lost, not in the present, but somewhere deep, dangerous, and unreachable. For days she had only seen him as one thing, a ruler with unshakable authority, a man who could silence entire courts with a look, whose word was law in a kingdom carved out of war. But tonight, there was a fracture in the steel, a silence in him that felt raw. The king lifted a goblet but did not drink. His eyes traced the flames like he was searching for something in them, an old wound, an answer, maybe even a ghost. Without turning, his voice broke the hush. Low, heavy, meant for her alone. Do you know how I came to this throne, Lyra? The question startled her. She had been warned never to speak unless spoken to in the king's presence. But this wasn't command. It was invitation. No, she said carefully, her voice soft in the wide chamber. Only the stories people whisper. He gave a humorless laugh, brief, sharp, the kind that belonged to someone who had seen too much to ever truly laugh. Whispers, he said, rolling the word as though it tasted bitter. They call me ruthless, merciless, a tyrant born from blood, and they're not wrong. He finally turned. His eyes caught hers, and Lyra forgot to breathe for a moment. He was not speaking to a court now, not even to a subject. He was speaking to her, like the walls had ears, but he no longer cared. I was not born a king. I was born prey. Lyra's brows furrowed. She wanted to ask, but she stayed quiet, waiting. The king set down his goblet with deliberate calm, but his voice roughened as he went on. My father was weak, an alpha in name only. He tried peace with rivals who laughed at his treaties. Wolves without honor smell weakness like blood on snow. One night they came, packs from 3 realms slaughtering everyone in their path. My mother died trying to shield me. My father was gutted before my eyes. His jaw clenched, but his tone did not break. He was not a man confessing. He was a man remembering the exact weight of every scar. They left me alive, A boy of 13. Small, unmarked. They thought I'd never rise. They thought I'd crawl. But hunger sharpens teeth. I swore on my mother's blood I'd never bow again. The fire cracked behind him, the sound of bones snapping. Lyra's chest tightened. She could see it, the boy drenched in blood, the wolves circling, the freezing earth beneath him. She had felt alone before, abandoned before, but never like that. The king's eyes darkened, a storm gathering. I fought, not for a crown, not at first, for survival. I bled in the pits they threw me into, fought wolves twice my size, killed them with nothing but rage and hands that would not stop. By 16, I had carved fear into every rival alpha that had mocked my bloodline. By 20, I tore their banners from their castles, and when I finally claimed the throne that should never have been mine, I swore I would never lose it. He stepped closer. The weight of his presence filled the space until Lyra's breath caught. This was not just a king. This was a man forged in fire and grave soil, steel beaten against steel until nothing soft survived. And yet she saw it. The shadow of the boy he had once been. The boy who had lost everything and built walls taller than palaces to keep the world out. Her heart betrayed her. It softened. "You call yourself ruthless," she whispered almost to herself. "But that sounds like survival." His eyes snapped to hers, sharp, piercing, almost angry at the gentleness of her words. For a heartbeat, the silence between them crackled with something neither of them wanted to name. The king's hand flexed at his side. For the first time, his voice faltered with something that was not command, but confession. "Survival demands a price, and the price is trust. I cannot afford it. Not from my people, not from my court." His eyes burned on her, low and steady. "Not even from you." The truth struck her like an arrow. She should have felt anger, fear, maybe even relief, knowing he'd never let her too close. But instead something ached. A strange, dangerous ache she hadn't felt since she was a child clutching for a hand in the dark. The silence stretched again, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy, charged, as though even the air waited for one of them to break it. Lyra looked away, her pulse betraying her. She didn't want this. Didn't want to see him as more than a king. Didn't want her heart to make mistakes her mind couldn't survive. And yet, when she finally glanced back, he was closer than before. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that the heat of him pressed against her skin, close enough that the silver of the moonlight caught the edges of his sharp features like a blade. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The moment trembled, fragile and alive, until the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. A guard at the door, bowing low, breaking the spell with a simple report. "My king, the patrols are ready for inspection." The king did not turn at once. His gaze lingered on Lyra, one heartbeat too long, the silence between them a language all its own. Then, slowly, he straightened, pulling the crown of command back onto his shoulders like armor. "See to it," he said curtly, and the spell shattered. Lyra sat very still, heart pounding in her chest. She'd come to hate him, fear him, fight him. But now she saw something else. Not just a ruler, not just a captor. A man built from scars and shadows, carrying a loneliness so vast it nearly mirrored her own. And that was the most dangerous truth of all. The palace library was a cathedral of silence, its vaulted ceilings swallowing even the faintest whisper. Moonlight filtered through stained glass high above, painting the floor in fractured silver and gold. Shelves upon shelves towered around Lyra, each carved of ancient oak, each sagging beneath the weight of scrolls and tomes, bound in leather darker than night. She had slipped in unnoticed. The guards believed she was in her chamber, asleep, but the king had underestimated her restlessness. Sleep rarely claimed her now. When it did, it brought dreams of wolves made of light, of voices that whispered her name with too much hunger. She needed answers. needed something solid in a world of shifting shadows and hungry stares. Her hands trailed along the spines of books as if they might hum with power. And then, tucked in the darkest corner, she found it. A scroll sealed with wax, cracked by time, its ribbon frayed. The marking on its edge chilled her. A crescent moon, pierced by a fang. Her heart beat harder. She carried it to the central table, laying it flat, and with trembling fingers, broke the seal. The parchment breathed dust and secrets as it unfurled. The script was old, curling like smoke, words that seemed to shimmer in and out of focus. She leaned closer, lips moving silently as she read. The moonbound shall come when bloodlines fracture and kingdoms tremble, chosen not as mate, but as mirror. She is both flame and blade, both sanctuary and doom. Lyra's throat tightened. She read further, eyes burning. If she gives her heart, the Alpha's strength shall rise beyond mortal kings, crowned by the goddess herself. His reign shall become legend, unbroken and eternal. Her fingers dug into the parchment. She already knew where this was going. She didn't want to read it, and yet she couldn't stop. But if she withholds, if she rejects, her power shall cut him down. His throne shall crumble, his name swallowed, his bloodline severed. The words seemed to echo in her skull, louder than her own pulse. She sank into the chair, the world tilting around her. Every glance the king gave her, every unspoken moment between them, every strange pull in her chest. The prophecy had already written it. If she chose love, he would rise higher than ever. If she turned away, he would fall, utterly and forever. A choice no one should hold, a choice she had never asked for. Lyra shut her eyes, pressing her palms to her temples. She thought of the king's voice the night before, low and rough with memories of blood and fire. She thought of the boy who had clawed his way to a throne he never wanted but refused to surrender. And she thought of the look in his eyes when silence between them had nearly cracked into something dangerous, something she hadn't had the courage to name. If he knew this prophecy, what would he do to her? Keep her closer, chain her tighter, demand a love she wasn't sure she could give? Or worse, kill her before she ever had the chance to destroy him? Her lips parted with the weight of the secret. No, she could not tell him. Not yet. The scroll trembled in her grip. She rolled it tight again, forced her breath to steady, and returned it to the shelf. But she knew she'd never be able to bury what she'd read. The words burned too deep. She was the edge of the blade. And one day soon she would cut him, to crown him or to kill him. Far from the palace walls in the rival kingdom of Calethorn, firelight burned in a different hall. Not moonlit silence, but a circle of snarling voices and iron resolve. Alphas from across the realm stood gathered, each draped in the sigils of their packs, each bearing the scars of ambition. At the center of the hall sat High Lord Malor, the rival Alpha whose name was a curse in Dragor's courts. His silver hair caught the torchlight like steel, his eyes sharp as if he could cut with a glance alone. A messenger knelt before him, blood still drying on his tunic. "She is alive, my lord," the man rasped. "The girl, the moonbound. The king of Dragor holds her in his palace." The hall erupted. Alphas slammed fists to tables, voices clashing like blades. "She belongs to our prophecy," one growled. "The goddess marked her for Calethorn, not for a butcher king," another spat. "Dragor will fall if she stays with him." Malor raised a single hand, and silence snapped into place. He stood, his cloak trailing behind him, his voice deep, steady, dangerous. "Then Dragor shall fall." The torches hissed as though feeding on the sound of his words. "We gather not tomorrow, not next moon. We gather now. Every Alpha that swore loyalty to Calethorn will march. We will not beg for the moonbound. We will take her. And we will burn Dragor's crown from his head." The hall thundered with approval. The war had been named. Back in Dragor, Lyra returned to her chamber, with the secret coiled like a serpent in her chest. The moonlight cut across her bed, cold and sharp. She curled beneath the covers but did not close her eyes. Somewhere in the palace, the king was likely sharpening his sword, preparing for battles he believed were born of politics, of rivalries, of ancient grudges. He did not yet know the war already belonged to her, to the choice in her chest, to the prophecy she would never speak aloud. And Lyra, staring into the dark, realized something far more terrifying than fate itself. The decision she would one day have to make wasn't between life and death. It was between love and ruin. And her heart, traitorous, trembling, alive, had already begun to choose. The night was still when it came for her. Lyra lay awake in her chamber, eyes tracing the silver wash of moonlight across the stone ceiling. Sleep had abandoned her long ago. The prophecy's words replayed in her head, each line striking like a hammer. If she gives her heart, the Alpha's strength shall rise. If she withholds, his throne shall crumble. She had tried to bury the scroll back in the library, but the words had already buried themselves inside her. She turned on her side, dragging the covers closer. Somewhere in the palace, footsteps echoed faintly, guards patrolling, steel boots against stone. Comforting, she told herself. The king's keep was a fortress, impregnable. No one could reach her here. And then she heard it. A scrape. Soft, deliberate. Not the heavy march of guards, but something slower. Closer. Her pulse skipped. She sat upright, listening. The sound came again, from the balcony. A whisper of movement, a breath in the wrong place. Lyra slid out of bed, heart hammering. She moved silently across the room, bare feet against cold stone, reaching the curtain that veiled the balcony doors. Slowly, she pulled it aside. A figure stood in the moonlight. Masked, cloaked. A blade glinted in his hand. Lyra gasped. The assassin lunged. She stumbled back, narrowly avoiding the strike as the dagger sliced air where her throat had been. She tried to scream, but a second figure was already inside, shadows splitting from shadows. Hands seized her arm. She kicked, twisted, fought like a cornered wolf. Another dagger flashed. She braced for pain. The door to her chamber slammed open, and the king was there. He moved like a storm, faster than thought. His sword caught the moonlight as it tore through the first assassin's chest. The man gurgled, staggered, fell. The second turned, blade raised, but the king caught him by the throat and slammed him against the wall so hard the stone cracked. His growl was pure fury, low and primal, more beast than man. "Who sent you?" he snarled. The assassin only spat blood, defiance gleaming in his eyes. The king's grip tightened, bones crunched. The man went limp, sliding to the floor. Lyra stood frozen, her breath shallow, her nightdress torn at the shoulder where the assassin's blade had grazed. The smell of blood filled the chamber, metallic and sharp, mixing with the chill of the night air. The king turned, chest rising and falling like a caged beast. His eyes found hers, wild and unguarded. For the first time since she had met him, he didn't look like a ruler holding his mask. He looked like a man who had almost lost something he refused to admit he needed. He crossed the room in 2 strides. His hand caught her wrist, not rough, but firm, grounding. "Did they touch you?" His voice was a growl, tight with something she had never heard from him before. Fear. Lyra shook her head, words failing. Her throat worked, but nothing came out. His hand slid from her wrist to her shoulder, fingers grazing the torn fabric, the faint red mark beneath. The look in his eyes darkened, not with suspicion this time, but with something hotter, fiercer. "I should have killed them slower," he muttered. She should have recoiled, should have pulled back. But her body betrayed her. The heat of his hand, the weight of his gaze, the scent of leather and steel and smoke. It wrapped around her, suffocating, intoxicating. She swallowed hard, finally forcing words past her lips. "Why? Why do you care so much?" The king's eyes locked on hers. For a moment he didn't answer, His jaw flexed like he was holding something back, something dangerous. And then he said it, low and raw, the truth cracking through his armor. "Because you are mine." The words cut through her like fire. Lyra staggered back, shaking her head. "No, you can't." But her voice betrayed her, trembling, unconvincing. His eyes narrowed, studying her, seeing too much. "You feel it too." "I don't." "Yes." He stepped closer. "You do." The air between them tightened, thick, alive. She wanted to deny it, wanted to spit the word no, but the truth pressed too hard against her ribs. Every glance, every touch, every moment where silence had spoken louder than words. It was there. The bond, the forbidden pull. Her chest heaved, her voice broke. "I feel it." The admission slipped from her like a wound. She pressed her hands to her face as if she could take it back, as if she could hide from the weight of what she'd just said. "But it terrifies me," she whispered. "Do you understand? It terrifies me. Because if it's true, if fate has tied me to you, then one day I could save you, or I could destroy you. And I don't know which is worse." The king's hand caught hers, pulling them away from her face. His grip was steady, anchoring her, trembling. "I don't care what fate says." His voice was rough, each word deliberate. "Prophecies are chains for cowards. I broke mine the day I carved my throne from blood. If the goddess herself wants me dead, she can come and try. But you..." His eyes burned into hers, fierce and unyielding. "You belong to me." Her breath hitched, caught between fear and something far more dangerous. The silence after his vow was heavy, filled with the scent of blood and steel, filled with the pounding of her heart. She wanted to speak, to argue, to push him away. But the words wouldn't come, because a part of her, the part she hated most, wanted to believe him. Outside, the moon hung low, swollen and white, as if it bore witness to a bond neither of them could deny. And in the shadows beyond Dragor's walls, far from their chamber, rival alphas sharpened their blades and prepared to strike. War was coming. And now, Lyra knew, it would not be fought only with swords. It would be fought with her heart. The first flames rose at midnight. From the watchtowers on Dragor's northern wall, soldiers saw the horizon bleed orange, thick columns of smoke clawing their way into the sky. Villages burned, not from accident or misfortune, but from torches carried by rival hands. The alarms rang out, the bells of war echoing across the stone courtyards. The king stood on the battlements, cloak whipping in the cold night wind, eyes fixed on the fire eating the borderlands, his fists clenched around the railing, knuckles white with fury. "They've crossed," his general growled beside him. "Calethorn dares set foot on our soil." The king's voice was low, iron-bound. "They do more than dare. They declare war." Orders snapped across the walls. Messengers sprinted down the stairwells. The palace, once humming with feasts and whispers, now roared with the chaos of preparation. And somewhere beneath all the shouting, Lyra stood frozen in the shadows of the courtyard, staring at the smoke in the distance. Her chest tightened until it ached. She had known this was coming, had felt it in the whispers of prophecy, in the gathering storm of politics. But seeing it unfold in fire made it real in a way she hadn't been ready for. They were burning for her. Later, she found him in the war hall, a chamber alive with maps and steel. Generals bent over the table, shifting tokens carved in the shapes of wolves and crowns. Lines were drawn, borders marked, strategies hissed in hushed, urgent tones. The king stood at the head, his presence towering, voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "We march before dawn. If Calethorn wants fire, we give them a storm. For every village they burn, we burn 3 of theirs. For every life they take, we take 10. The generals thumped fists to their chests in approval. But Lyra's stomach turned. She could see it. The rivers of blood, the bodies piled, the children screaming as homes turned to ash, and all of it, for her. No. The word tore out before she realized she'd spoken. The room stilled. Dozens of eyes swung toward her. Lyra stepped forward, trembling but unbroken. "You can't do this." The king's gaze locked on her, sharp as steel. "Careful, Lyra. You'll march into their trap. They want this war. They want you bleeding in their fields. And for what? Because of me." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "Don't slaughter your people for something that's not even their burden." A dangerous silence filled the chamber. One general sneered. "The girl forgets her place." The king's head turned, slow and lethal. His eyes burned into the man, and the general fell silent at once. The king's attention returned to her, gaze unrelenting. "You think this war is your fault?" His voice was low, so low the room seemed to lean in. Her throat tightened. "It is. If I had never been found, if I weren't here." Enough. The word cracked like thunder. He strode toward her, every step heavy with power, and when he stopped, he was so close she could feel the heat rolling off him. "This war was coming long before you, Lyra. Kelthorn has waited years for my crown to slip. They'll use you as an excuse, but don't flatter yourself. You are not the reason they burn my villages." His hand lifted, not rough this time, but steady, curling around her jaw. He tilted her face up to meet his gaze. "And even if you were, I would still burn the world before I let them take you." Her breath caught, heart thundering in her chest. The war council dissolved around them. The generals averted their eyes, muttering excuses, slipping from the chamber. The doors shut behind the last of them, leaving only silence. Only the two of them, and restraint finally broke. The king kissed her like he'd been holding back for years, fierce, consuming, the kind of kiss that claimed, that demanded. Lyra gasped against him, hands braced against his chest, but when his lips pressed harder, when his body pulled hers closer, her resistance burned away like paper in flame. Her fingers curled into the leather of his tunic. The taste of him was heat and danger, the scent of smoke and steel filling her senses until there was nothing else. He broke away just long enough to growl against her lips. "Say you're mine." She should have refused, should have fought him. But her voice betrayed her, trembling and raw. "I'm yours." That was all it took. He lifted her, setting her on the edge of the war table, maps scattering beneath her legs. His mouth trailed down her throat, teeth grazing skin, and she shivered, arching into him. Lyra's heart screamed warnings, but her body, her soul, answered something older, something primal. This was fate's pull, irresistible and terrifying. Her fingers slid into his hair, tugging, and he groaned low, deep in his chest, the sound of a man losing control. His hands gripped her thighs, pulling her closer, pressing her against the hardness of him. "Terrified?" he murmured against her ear. "Yes," she whispered, "but I can't stop." "Good," he growled. "Neither can I." The maps fell to the floor, forgotten. The war outside raged in fire and strategy, but inside this chamber, another war broke. One of restraint shattered, one of two souls bound by prophecy, giving in to the very thing that could crown or destroy them. Hours later, the war hall lay in ruins of parchment and scattered goblets. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, bathing their tangled forms in silver. Lyra lay against his chest, her hair damp with sweat, her lips swollen from his kiss. The king's arm wrapped around her, possessive even in sleep. She should have felt shame, fear, perhaps even triumph. But all she felt was the pounding of her heart, the echo of his vow. "I don't care what fate says. You belong to me." Lyra shut her eyes, knowing that tonight had sealed more than passion. It had sealed war, love, and ruin in the same breath. And as the fires still burned on Dragor's borders, Lyra realized the truth. The world outside was crumbling. But the most dangerous fire of all had been lit here, in this chamber, between them. A fire neither of them could ever put out. Dawn bled across Dragor in shades of crimson and gold. The fires at the border still smoked, but within the palace, another fire had been lit, one no rival army could match. Lyra woke to it first. Her body shivered though no cold touched her. A warmth thrummed beneath her skin, pulsing like a second heartbeat, and when her eyes fluttered open, the chamber around her shimmered faintly, as if the very air bent toward her. She turned her head. The king lay beside her, his arm draped across her waist, his face unguarded in rare sleep. But even in slumber, he radiated power. His chest rose and fell with steady breaths, and each exhale seemed to ripple the silence of the room. And then Lyra saw it, her own skin glowing faintly where it touched his. Silver threads of light, delicate yet unbreakable, wound across her arms, her chest, her throat, like the kiss of moonlight itself branded into her flesh. The moonbound bond. She gasped softly, sitting up. The glow pulsed brighter with the movement, filling the chamber with ethereal light. She clutched at her chest, but there was no pain, only heat, a sacred kind of burning that spread from her heart outward. The king stirred, golden eyes snapping open instantly, alert even before his body was fully awake. His gaze locked on her glowing form, and for the first time in years, perhaps ever, he looked stunned. Lyra. His voice was hushed, reverent. I don't know what's happening. Her voice shook, though not from fear alone. She felt alive in ways she had never known possible, as if every nerve, every breath, every beat of her heart carried purpose. He sat up, one hand cupping her face, thumb brushing her cheek where the light pulsed. His eyes glowed in answer, brighter, fiercer, a predator's gold sharpened into something almost divine. "It's the bond," he said, voice low, edged with awe. The prophecy spoke of this. The moonbound. When they yield, they ignite. Lyra's lips parted. "And you—" He inhaled sharply, as if testing the air itself, and clenched his fists. Power rolled off him in waves, invisible but undeniable. The torches in the chamber guttered though no wind touched them. The very stones of the palace seemed to hum beneath their weight. "I feel it," he admitted. His jaw tightened, veins standing out in his forearms. "Stronger than ever. Like the world itself bends to my will." The news spread through the palace before sunrise. Their king had changed. In the training yards, warriors stumbled back when he entered, unable to meet his eyes. During drills, he struck with such force that steel shattered in his hands. His roars carried across the courtyard like thunder, sending shivers down even seasoned generals' spines. "This is not natural," one whispered when they thought he could not hear. But Lyra heard. She watched from the shadows, arms wrapped around herself, torn between pride and dread, because she knew what had fueled this transformation. It was not his crown, not his throne. It was her. Their union had already rewritten fate. The prophecy's edge had cut, and the king's strength was the proof. That night, when the war council convened again, every eye in the chamber avoided meeting his. He towered at the table, maps spread before him, but his presence was so heavy it pressed on their very lungs. One general finally broke the silence. "My king, forgive me, but you are different." The king's golden gaze slid to him, and the man nearly fell to his knees under the weight of it. "Different?" "Stronger," another said quickly, sweat beading on his brow. "Unstoppable." The king allowed the words, though his gaze flicked briefly to Lyra, standing at the edge of the chamber, her silver glow dimmed but not gone. He knew, as she knew, what fueled this storm. When the council ended, he found her alone in the moonlit corridor. "You've seen it," he said, voice softer now, though it still thrummed with power. Lyra nodded. Her throat was dry. "It's because of me." His steps were measured, deliberate, until he stood close enough that her glow brushed against his aura. "It's because of us. But don't you see?" Her voice trembled. This is what they wanted. Calethorn, the prophecy, all of it. Me bound to you, changing everything. And now your own people look at you like a god, he interrupted, eyes narrowing. Like a monster, she whispered. For a moment, silence. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows. Then his hand caught hers, pressing it against his chest where his heart pounded, steady and strong. Do you feel that? He asked. Yes. That's no monster, Lyra, that's me. And I would rather be feared with you at my side than worshipped alone. Her chest ached at his words. She wanted to believe him, and yet, deep inside, she feared what her choice had unleashed, not just for them, but for everyone under his crown. The following days blurred into fire and steel. Villages burned at the borders, but when the king rode out with his armies, the earth itself seemed to tremble beneath their march. Lyra watched him from the walls as he charged into battle. His blade cut through enemies like lightning, his roars sending rival alphas staggering. His army followed with unshakable faith, drunk on his power. But behind that awe, behind their shouts of victory, Lyra saw the flickers of fear in their eyes. Even his most loyal men whispered in the dark. Their king was becoming something else, something untouchable. And Lyra knew. It was her love that had done this. The prophecy had warned her. The Moonbound could magnify their alpha's power if they loved him, or destroy him if they rejected him, and she had already made her choice. That night, when he returned blood-stained but unbroken, he sought her out before all else. His hands, still streaked with crimson, cupped her face as if she were the only thing tethering him to the ground. You are my storm, he whispered against her lips. My strength, my fate. Lyra closed her eyes, heart aching with the weight of what she had unleashed. She had chosen him, and now, there was no turning back. The storm had risen, and it would not be stopped. The moon was full that night, swollen and silver, casting long white spears of light through the tall windows of the queen's chamber. Lyra had not slept easily since their union. Every dream had been tinged with light and shadow, whispers in the corners of her mind. But this night, the pull was different, heavy, inevitable. When her eyes shut, the darkness did not come. Instead, she stood in a vast plain of silver sand, stretching endlessly beneath a sky without stars. The air hummed with a sacred chill, and above her hung not one moon but three, pale and heavy, their light searing her skin like fire. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She was dreaming, and yet every grain of sand beneath her feet felt too real, each gust of frozen wind biting as sharply as steel. And then she felt it, a presence. The air thickened, trembling as if the heavens themselves bowed. A figure rose from the horizon, not walking but forming, her body sculpted from light itself. A woman draped in flowing white, hair cascading like liquid silver, eyes burning with eternity. The moon goddess. Lyra fell to her knees instinctively, her heart pounding, the glow of her bond dimming in the presence of this overwhelming divinity. She had prayed to the moon goddess her entire life, had whispered her name in the dark when there was no one else to hear her. To see her now was to feel both salvation and judgment in the same breath. But there was no warmth in the goddess's gaze. You, the goddess's voice thundered, echoing across the endless plain. It was not the gentle call of faith. It was fury, deep and righteous, rattling Lyra's very bones. Lyra bowed her head lower, pressing her palms into the cold sand. Great Mother, do not speak. The voice cracked like lightning. You were chosen. You were moonbound, carved by my hand, set upon the path of destiny, and yet, the goddess's eyes burned brighter, searing. You have failed. Lyra's breath shook as tears blurred her vision. Failed? You were not meant to bind him, the goddess said, each word a weight heavier than stone. You were meant to end him. The words slammed into Lyra like blades. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with horror. No. Yes. The goddess stepped closer, her light blinding, her fury undeniable. He is not salvation. He is storm. He is corruption clothed in power, a fire that will consume all. You were to be the blade, Lyra. The bond was never yours to give. And now, her voice fractured into thunder. Now fate teeters on the edge of ruin. Lyra's body shook. She pressed her hands to her chest, feeling the bond there, the silver light she had surrendered to willingly. She remembered his hands on her skin, his voice whispering against her lips. You are my storm, my fate. She had chosen him, not because of prophecy, not because of power, but because for the first time in her life, she had wanted to. I love him, Lyra whispered, broken but defiant. The goddess's expression hardened. Love. Her laugh was cold, merciless. Love is a mortal sickness, and you, Moonbound, were born not for love but for judgment. Do not forget, if he rises unchecked, his crown will be bathed in the blood of kingdoms. You will be the cause. Lyra's tears streamed freely. She reached out, though her hand passed through the goddess's light. Please, do not ask this of me. I do not ask. The goddess's voice dropped into something crueler, sharper. I command. When the moment comes, you will do what you were made to do. End him. The moons above flared so brightly they burned her vision. Lyra screamed as light consumed her, and woke with a gasp. Her chamber was dark, shadows stretching long across the walls. Sweat drenched her skin. Her hands trembled as she clutched the sheets, heart hammering against her ribs. The echo of the goddess's words rang in her ears. You were meant to end him. Her bond still pulsed faintly, the silver threads along her arms glowing in the moonlight that streamed through the window. She stared at it in horror, as if her very body betrayed her. A soft creak broke the silence. Lyra looked up sharply, and froze. He was there. The king leaned against the doorframe, clad in nothing but dark trousers, his chest bare, golden eyes gleaming in the dim light. He had not knocked. He hadn't needed to. Somehow he had known. You were dreaming, he said quietly, his voice low but edged with concern. Lyra swallowed, forcing herself to breathe evenly. Yes. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate. The shadows clung to him, but the fire in his eyes burned them away. You called out. His gaze searched hers, sharp enough to pierce through lies. What did you see? Her lips parted, but no words came. How could she tell him? That the goddess herself had commanded her to kill him? That her love was not salvation, but betrayal to fate? The silence stretched too long. The king's jaw tightened. He reached her side in 2 strides, his hand catching her chin, forcing her gaze to meet his. His voice was a growl now, low and dangerous. Don't lie to me, Lyra. Her breath caught. She wanted to say it, to pour the truth into his hands and beg him to save her from it. But the memory of the goddess's fury scorched her tongue. She shook her head, whispering, I can't. For the first time in weeks, she saw it, doubt flickering in his eyes. Not the doubt of himself, the doubt of her. His hand fell from her face. He stepped back, pacing once like a caged beast. So that's it. His voice was cold now, cutting. You fear me. No, she said quickly, reaching for him, but he pulled away. His laugh was bitter, sharp. Don't deny it. I see it in your eyes. The tremor, the hesitation. You look at me now and wonder if you've made a mistake. Her chest caved at the words. That's not what this is. Then what is it? His golden gaze burned her, demanding answers she could not give. You say nothing. You hide your truth, and now you shrink from me as if I'm already the monster they whisper I am. Tears filled her eyes again. She shook her head desperately, whispering, It's not you I fear. But the words trailed into silence, the truth trapped like thorns in her throat. The king turned away, fists clenched, shoulders rigid with a fury he barely contained. You belong to me, he growled, as if the words could anchor her, as if saying it enough times could make it true. But the edge of hurt in his voice betrayed him. Lyra reached for him again, but he stepped into the shadows before she could touch him, leaving only his words behind. If you cannot stand at my side without fear, then perhaps you were never mine at all. The door slammed shut. Lyra sank back against the bed, trembling, her heart in ruins. Between the wrath of the goddess and the wounded pride of her king, she was being torn apart. And for the first time she wondered if fate itself had already betrayed them both. The dawn broke not with light, but with fire. From the palace towers horns blared, low, desperate, urgent. Their mournful cry spread across Dragor like thunder, waking the city in terror. By the time Lyra reached the balcony of her chamber, the horizon itself was ablaze. Flames tore across the dark line of the forest, and through the smoke came the sound of drums. War drums. The rival alphas had come. Lyra's breath caught as she saw them, a sea of banners and steel stretching across the plain below, tens of thousands strong. Wolves prowled at their flanks, their howls rising with the beat of the drums. Siege towers creaked as they were rolled forward, monstrous shapes outlined in fire. The palace, fortress though it was, suddenly felt like a cage. The door to her chamber burst open. Guards rushed in, armor clanking, weapons drawn. "My lady, you must—" But before they could finish, a roar split the courtyard below, fierce and primal. Every man froze, every wolf stilled, even the drums faltered for a breath. The king had arrived. He strode into the courtyard clad in blackened steel, his golden eyes glowing like twin suns. His presence alone shook the air, the bond with Lyra burning in her chest, as though her heart itself followed him into battle. The enemy answered with their own roar, a cacophony of voices and beasts. The siege began. Arrows blackened the sky, raining down like locusts. Shields rose, wood splintered, men screamed. The palace walls shook as boulders from trebuchets slammed into stone. But the king did not flinch. "Dragor!" His voice thundered across the chaos, carrying above the fire, above the screams. "They think us weak. They think us breakable. Show them tonight what it means to defy the crown." The soldiers roared back, the sound shaking Lyra to her bones. She watched as he charged the gates, leading the first strike himself. He was not a king hiding behind walls. He was the storm, the spearhead, the fury of Dragor unleashed. Steel met steel in the shadow of the burning gates. Wolves leapt, claws flashing, but his blade cut through them like lightning. Every strike he made carried the weight of the bond, his enemies falling as though the goddess herself guided his hand. Lyra pressed her hands against the cold stone of the balcony, her heart pounding. The bond pulled at her, urging her down, into the blood and fire, into his side where she belonged. But the goddess's words from her dream clawed at her mind. You were meant to end him. The siege stretched on. Hours bled together in fire and carnage. Lyra was ushered through the palace corridors as guards tried to spirit her away to safety. But no chamber was safe tonight. The walls shook with every strike of the enemy's siege towers. Ash drifted through shattered windows. The halls echoed with the cries of the wounded. Then came the horn, long, sharp, breaking like bone. The palace gates had been breached. The battle flooded inside. Lyra found herself swept into the chaos. The air reeked of iron and smoke. Soldiers clashed in the marble halls where once only courtly whispers had dared tread. Blood slicked the tiles. Tapestries burned, flames devouring the history of Dragor in a heartbeat. And above it all, she felt it, the sudden jolt in her chest. Pain. A tearing, burning agony that was not her own. The bond screamed. Her eyes widened. No. She ran. She found him in the great courtyard surrounded by fire and ruin. The king fought like a god unleashed, his sword a streak of silver fire. His body drenched in blood, both his own and his enemies. Corpses lay strewn at his feet, the flagstones cracked beneath the force of his strikes. But even gods can bleed. As she watched, 3 rival alphas closed on him at once. He roared, swinging wide, cutting one down, but in that breath, another struck. A blade found his side, plunging deep. Lyra screamed as the pain tore through her, her own body convulsing as if she too had been struck. The bond seared, her vision going white. He staggered, golden eyes blazing even as blood poured from the wound. He struck again, felling the second alpha, but the third lunged in the same instant, claws ripping across his chest. The king fell to one knee. The sight of it broke her. No! Lyra did not remember running, only the fire that consumed her as she burst into the courtyard, unarmed, unarmored, but blazing with silver light. Her glow shattered the shadows, her scream echoing like thunder. The last alpha turned, startled by the divine blaze. It was the mistake that killed him. The king, though bleeding and broken, surged forward with a final roar, driving his blade through the rival's throat. The man fell, choking on his own blood. And then the king collapsed. Lyra dropped to her knees beside him, hands shaking as she pressed them to his wounds. Blood soaked her palms, hot and unending. "Stay with me," she begged, her tears falling onto his face. His golden eyes flickered, fighting to stay open, his breath ragged. "Lyra." His voice was barely a whisper, but his hand found hers, gripping weakly. "You came." The bond surged, pulling at her deeper, harder. Her silver glow spread from her skin into his, threads of light weaving across his wounds, struggling to close them. But the gashes were too deep, the blade in his side too cruel. "Don't leave me," she whispered, her whole body trembling as she poured herself into him, every drop of power, every shred of will. I won't survive it." The courtyard burned around them, soldiers clashing, wolves howling, fire raining from above. But in that moment, there was only the two of them, bound by silver and gold, caught between love and destiny. Her glow flared brighter, searing, almost blinding. The bond screamed in her veins, demanding more, pulling everything from her. She gave it willingly. And then, his chest rose, a sharp inhale. His eyes snapped open, blazing brighter than fire. The wounds sealed in a rush of light. His strength surged, the earth trembling beneath him as he rose, dragging her up with him. Gasps rang across the courtyard as warriors on both sides turned to see him. Their king, bloodied but unbroken, reborn in silver fire. The enemy faltered. The king roared, voice shaking the very stones. "Dragor stands." His soldiers surged with him, their fear burned away by awe. The tide of battle turned in that single breath, and Lyra, pressed against his chest, knew. She had saved him. But in saving him, she had also bound him tighter to the destiny the goddess had warned her against. The storm had not ended. It had only begun. The battlefield was a graveyard of fire and steel. Smoke curled like black ribbons into the night sky, carrying with it the cries of men and wolves alike. The once golden banners of the king's realm were torn, trampled into the mud, their edges licked by flames. The air reeked of blood, iron, and something older, destiny itself, heavy and suffocating, pressing on every heart that dared still to beat. Lyra stumbled through the chaos, her dress ripped, her arms streaked with dirt and crimson. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but she forced her legs to move. Each step was agony, her body screaming to stop, but her soul knew there was only one place she had to be. Her eyes cut through the haze of fire and smoke until they landed on him. The king. He lay broken in the churned mud, armor split, his chest rising shallowly beneath the weight of a mortal wound. His once immovable presence, this alpha of alphas, this man whose mere gaze could silence entire courts, was dimmed, flickering like the last ember of a dying fire. His blood pooled around him, dark against the moonlight, and with each heartbeat, the pool widened. "No." Lyra's voice ripped from her throat, raw and jagged, a sound born of terror and love. She fell to her knees beside him, her trembling hands reaching for his face. His skin was cold, too cold. His eyes fluttered open, barely, revealing those storm-dark irises that had once terrified her, then guarded her, then consumed her entirely. Now they were weak, dulled, but still locked on her with an intensity that made her heart clench. Lyra. His voice was a broken whisper, the weight of a dying man carried on fragile air. Fate. It seems... one. Tears blurred her vision. She shook her head violently, her hair whipping, damp with smoke and sweat. No. No, don't you dare say that. You are not allowed to die. Do you hear me? You are not allowed. His lips curved faintly, half a smile, half a grimace of pain. Always so defiant. Her hands pressed against the wound in his chest, desperate, useless. She could feel his life slipping through her fingers like sand, no matter how tightly she tried to hold it. And then, deep within her, the moonbound power stirred. A glow, faint at first, shimmered across her skin, the same silvery light that had once terrified her. It pulsed, alive, demanding release. And with it came the voice, the moon goddess. Her words seared into Lyra's mind like fire carved into stone. This is your moment, child of the bond. End him. Fulfill what was written. A king's blood must fall to restore balance. Lyra's whole body trembled. She pressed her forehead to the king's, as if proximity could shield her from the divine decree. No, she whispered fiercely. No, I can't. I won't. You are moonbound, the goddess thundered inside her. Your purpose was never to love. Your purpose was to cleanse, to destroy before corruption festers. You delay only what must be. The king coughed, blood staining his lips, and his hand, trembling heavy, lifted to touch her face. Even in weakness, his thumb brushed her cheek, smearing ash and tears together. If this is it, he rasped, then let it be you. Better you than any blade. At least then, it's love that ends me. Her heart shattered. 1,000 jagged pieces drove into her soul at once. This man, the one she had feared, fought, resisted, then surrendered to, was asking her to kill him. And yet her heart screamed for the opposite. The choice. To heal him meant binding her soul to his forever, locking them together as one, never again free of the pull of his bond. It was surrender, not just to him, but to fate. To let him die meant obeying the moon goddess, fulfilling the prophecy, and perhaps saving kingdoms from war. But it would also mean carving out her own heart with her own hand. Tears streamed down her face. She bent closer, her lips brushing his ear as her voice shook. I won't kill you. I won't save you. I will change you. Before the goddess could thunder again, before doubt could claw back into her chest, Lyra lowered her lips and pressed a trembling kiss against his wound. The world froze. The battlefield silenced. The moon above flared, brighter than it had in centuries, its silver light pouring down like molten flame. Lyra's body ignited with that same radiance, her veins glowing with raw lunar fire. The king arched beneath her touch, his back lifting from the bloodied earth as the wound pulsed with blinding light. His body convulsed, not in death but in transformation. The moon goddess's voice split the air, furious and disbelieving. What have you done, child? You were given 2 paths, life or death. You were not meant to forge a third. Lyra gasped as power ripped through her, binding her soul deeper into the king's than she had ever thought possible. She felt his heartbeat in her chest, his breath in her lungs, his will merging with hers. His wound closed, not healed, not left to bleed, but marked. A scar, black as midnight, spread across his chest, glowing faintly like the crescent moon. The king's eyes snapped open. No longer storm dark, no longer the eyes of a man she had once feared. They glowed silver, the light of the moon itself, intertwined with shadows of his own power. He was no longer merely alpha. He was something else, something more. He sat up, his hand catching Lyra's wrist as though anchoring himself to her. His voice, when it came, was thunder and whisper all at once. You defied fate. Lyra's tears still streamed, but her jaw was set, her resolve unshaken. I chose us. Behind them, the battlefield trembled. Wolves on both sides faltered mid-strike, sensing the surge of unnatural power. The night bent around them, the stars themselves seeming to draw closer, as though watching. The moon goddess's cry echoed like a shattering storm across the heavens. You have broken prophecy, and for that, the world will bleed. But Lyra only clung to him, her king, her impossible choice now written into both their souls. Whatever storm awaited, they would face it together. And in that moment, amid blood and fire, love defied the goddess herself. The battlefield had gone silent, not because the war was over, but because every soul still breathing, friend, foe, beast, or man, had frozen where they stood. The air itself felt as though it had stopped moving. Smoke curled lazily upward, sparks drifted in slow arcs, and the world seemed to wait, holding its breath for what was about to unfold. At the center of the carnage, Lyra knelt in the blood-soaked earth, her hands still pressed to the chest of the man she loved. Her own body trembled with exhaustion, every vein burning with the aftershock of the power she had unleashed. Her hair clung to her damp cheeks, and her lips still tingled with the kiss that had not killed, not healed, but changed. And then he moved. The king. He rose from the ground, not with the staggering weakness of a dying man, but with a grace so unnatural it unsettled even the bravest alpha eyes upon him. His armor cracked and split, as though unable to contain the force now coiled inside him. When he lifted his head, the glow in his gaze was no longer mortal. Silver blazed where storm-dark eyes had once reigned, the same glow that shimmered within Lyra's own. But it was not hers alone. This light was wedded with shadow, deep, fathomless, primal. The raw essence of alpha power, married to the divine pulse of the moon. His aura exploded outward, slamming into the battlefield like a tidal wave. Wolves dropped to their knees involuntarily, their bodies trembling under the sheer weight of it. Even the enemy envoys, those alphas who had come to claim Lyra for their prophecy, fell to the mud, foreheads pressed against the earth. None dared move. Lyra rose slowly, her breath uneven, her eyes locked on him. He stood taller than ever before, and yet something in him was no longer entirely human, nor entirely wolf. He was something reborn, something unbound by any law she had ever known. Your Majesty, one of his generals whispered hoarsely, his voice caught between awe and fear. But no one else dared speak. The king's gaze fell on Lyra first. Always her. His silver-lit eyes softened, though the force radiating from him was enough to make the ground crack beneath his boots. He reached for her, not as an alpha claiming his omega, but as a man anchoring himself to the only truth that mattered. Lyra stepped forward, their hands meeting, and when their fingers locked, the glow of their bond surged outward like a second dawn. Wolves shielded their eyes from the brilliance, some crying out, others weeping without knowing why. For in that light there was something undeniable. Love stronger than fate, defiance more powerful than prophecy. Above them the moon trembled. Yes, trembled. Its silver face quaked as though even the heavens were unprepared for what had been forged in the dirt and blood of that battlefield. And from the sky the voice came again, the moon goddess. But this time she did not thunder, she did not command. She spoke with silence, her presence filling every heart on the field, her eyes, unseen yet undeniably felt, resting upon Lyra and the king. You were meant to end him. Her voice was quieter now, colder, as if tasting defeat on her immortal tongue. You were meant to fulfill balance with blood, not defy it with love. The king lifted his chin, his voice carrying not just to Lyra, but to every soldier, every alpha, every trembling wolf who heard. I will not bow, not to men, not to fate, not even to you. His words reverberated through the battlefield, a declaration that cracked the very foundations of what they had all believed. Lyra's grip on his hand tightened, her chest rising and falling as tears burned her eyes. For once she was not afraid of the goddess's wrath. She stood at his side, and that was enough. The rival alphas shifted uneasily, their shoulders bowing lower, their heads pressing deeper into the dirt. Not because they chose it, but because they could not resist. His aura was too strong. Their bodies betrayed them, trembling in fear as their once mighty pride collapsed. One by one they sank to their knees, powerless against what he had become. The king's eyes swept over them, not with cruelty, not with vengeance, but with something new. Judgment, perhaps, tempered by the woman at his side. And then the moon goddess's silence deepened. No lightning split the skies. No punishment rained down. She only watched. The tremor of the moon overhead stilled, as though she were listening, waiting. A war had not ended here. A war had just been born, not of kingdoms, not of thrones, but of fate and defiance, of love and prophecy. And as Lyra leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice soft enough for only him to hear, she whispered the truth neither of them could ignore. We are no longer Alpha and Omega. We are no longer king and executioner. We are something else. The king turned his head, his glowing gaze fixed on the horizon where flames still burned, where enemies still gathered, where destiny still seethed in silence. Then let the world learn what we are. And as the camera of the story pulled back, past the battlefield littered with the fallen, past the kneeling alphas, past the trembling armies, the final shot remained fixed on them. Lyra and her king hand in hand, silver light blazing around them. The moon hung above, not serene but uncertain, the goddess herself silent for the first time in eternity. And the unspoken promise echoed across the night. The war between fate and love had only just begun.
Thank you, untamed hearts, for staying till the end. The story pauses, but the fire never dies. Here in Tales by Jenny Moon, the hunt only waits for the next night. If you survived this chapter, step deeper. Share your presence with the pack, so it knows who dares to return. Now that the journey has ended, what's your final thought on this story? Share it in the comments. I'm curious how it made you feel. The night never sleeps, and neither do the things within it. Rest if you must. Keep the moon close. And if you feel eyes on you, or a whisper at your door, don't panic. It's only a story until the moon finds you.